Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to get straight to the heart of complex issues. Today, we're tackling a relationship that's, well, absolutely vital for India and the world. The current state of India-China relations. Especially for those of you deep in your UPSC prep, this is a daily current affairs topic you can't ignore. It really touches on everything IR, security, economics, definitely relevant for mains, and you'll see pointers for prelims too. We've looked at a recent, pretty comprehensive analysis from the Hindustan Times. Our goal, to give you a sharp, focused understanding. We want to help you cut through the noise and see what really matters, the key developments, the ongoing challenges. We'll be looking at, diplomatic moves, the LAC situation, economic ties, the whole strategic picture. Okay, let's unpack this.
It's definitely a complex one. And, as the Hindustan Times analysis points out, even after marking 75 years of diplomatic ties this April, it's still this fascinating mix of contrasts. You see these tangible steps towards talking, towards engagement, but they exist right alongside these really deep-rooted frictions.
Exactly. And it's not just about history, is it? It's about grasping these very recent shifts. The analysis highlights some, well, encouraging steps, starting with renewed diplomatic dialogue. Seems like both sides are trying to keep the lines open.
That's a key takeaway. The revitalization of structured talks, like a special representatives mechanism, the SR's talks, that's pretty significant. And what's really striking is that 23rd SR's meeting in December 2024. I mean, getting that high-level dialogue back after 5 years, it suggests deliberate choice, perhaps, to look beyond just the military stuff and get to the political roots of the issues.
Which feels crucial, doesn't it? Especially with the border tensions always simmering. And speaking of the border, this agreement on regulated patrolling along parts of the LAC, the line of actual control, that seems like another positive, though maybe limited, step.
Limited, yes, but important. The analysis is clear that, we're not back to the pre-2020 situation yet, not by a long shot. But this agreement on how patrolling happens at those key friction points, it does signal a different approach to managing things day to day.
Like the October 2024 agreement.
Exactly. That agreement on patrolling protocols at several flashpoints, basically ending that 4-year standoff since Galwan. It's a concrete example. It's about trying to lower the risk of, well, unintended clashes. Always a worry there.
And it's worth noting what the Indian External Affairs Minister said recently, right? That peace and tranquility at the border is non-negotiable. Plus, that shared idea that rebuilding ties post-2020 is in their mutual interest, that kind of signaling matters.
It certainly does. It underscores let's say, a shared desire to stop things getting worse, even if the big disagreements are still there. Now, shifting focus a bit, the Hindustan Times piece also mentions positive signs in people-to-people exchanges, like a kind of soft reset.
Yes. That caught my eye, too. After all the disruption, restarting visa issuance, talking about pilgrimages again, academic links, it feels like an effort to rebuild some basic connection.
And there's data. Over 85,000 visas issued by China to Indians just between January and April 2025. And finalizing the details for the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra this year. These are, tangible things. Could help the overall mood.
Now, sticking with this idea of different things happening at once, this is where it gets really interesting, especially for anyone thinking about the economics. Despite all the politics, the economic relationship is still huge. Trade seems remarkably resilient.
It's quite something, isn't it? Not just the size U.S. $118.4 billion in trade in FY 2024, but how it's held up. China's still India's second largest trading partner, even after India brought in those curbs on tech imports and other responses post-Galwan.
So decoupling isn't really happening.
Well, it suggests there's this powerful economic logic at play. Both sides, despite the distrust, find it really beneficial to keep these links. For UPSC aspirants thinking long-term, it definitely raises questions about how realistic a full strategic decoupling actually is.
And perhaps, surprisingly, this pragmatism extends to some global issues too, like climate change.
Yes, that's another area flagged up. Shared positions on things like climate justice, green finance, South cooperation. It offers another, maybe limited avenue for working together. Both worry about Western carbon tariffs, inequities in global climate governance, that sort of thing.
Like opposing the EU carbon border tax together at COP29?
Exactly. That's a concrete example. That kind of alignment on specific multilateral issues, it can boost India's voice in those forums.
Okay, so we have these pockets of, let's say, constructive engagement, but the Hindustan Times analysis doesn't shy away from the big problems. China's ICAD strategy is mentioned as a major concern.
Yeah, this is critical for understanding the ongoing friction. The analysis talks about Beijing using what it calls illegal, coercive, aggressive, deceptive tactics, ICAD. It looks like this multi-pronged approach to try and, well, chip away at the status quo. And India, understandably, sees it as a direct challenge.
Things like renaming places in Arunachal Pradesh, that feels deliberately provocative.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Giving Chinese or Tibetan names to 30 locations there, it's a clear attempt to bolster their claims on paper, cartographic assertion. And then there's the plan for that huge dam on the Yarlung Tsangpo, right near the Arunachal border. That's classic hydropolitics, using water as potential leverage. Naturally, that causes huge concern downstream in India.
And then there's the whole China-Pakistan thing. CPEC, the economic corridor, that's been a sore point for ages.
A huge one. China's deepening ties with Pakistan. And the fact CPEC runs through Gilgit-Baltistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. That's seen as a direct violation of India's sovereignty claims. It seriously ramps up worries in India about a potential two-front situation. Plus, China's presence in Gwadar port, weapon transfers, it all adds to the anxiety.
The economy also throws up big challenges, doesn't it? That massive trade imbalance seems to be getting worse.
It is. It hit $99.2 billion in the last fiscal year. It's a huge deficit, creating a real economic vulnerability for India. And this ongoing reliance on Chinese tech and hardware, even with the risks, it just makes that imbalance worse and kind of limits India's options strategically.
And of course, we can't talk India-China without the border itself. The unresolved dispute, the military buildup along the LAC.
That's the absolute core issue, the fundamental fault line. Yes, there's been some disengagement in specific spots, but the fact that full de-escalation, pulling troops back properly, hasn't happened. That's a major worry. Plus, the Hindustan Times piece highlights China expanding its gray zone tactics, actions that increase friction but stop just short of open conflict. And repeated protocol violations just keep eroding trust.
And this competition isn't just on the land border, is it? China's growing influence in India's neighborhood is another key battleground. South Asia, the Indian Ocean.
Precisely. China's bigger footprint nearby through the Belt and Road Initiative, port investments directly challenges India's traditional influence. Think about investments in ports in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Maldives, the Hambantota port lease, that recent security deal with the Maldives. These all signal a growing Chinese strategic presence right in India's backyard. It fuels competition across the board.
And finally, how they see each other's alliances. China seems wary of India getting closer to the U.S. and the QAD, right?
Yes. The analysis suggests Beijing sees India's stronger U.S. ties and its role in the QAD as India moving away from strategic autonomy. They might interpret India's Indo-Pacific strategy as being aimed at containing China. Even something like India's labor agreement with Taiwan back in February 2024 likely raise eyebrows in Beijing given their stance.
So it's this complex picture, navigating cooperation and pretty serious friction. Now, the Hindustan Times piece also really digs into China's role in India's supply chains. That feels like a critical vulnerability.
Absolutely critical. Just how dependent India is on China for essential goods. It has huge implications for security, both economic and strategic. Take high-tech hardware, electronics. India relies heavily on China, especially for components in IT and electronics. Imports in that sector jumped to nearly 11% to $46.6 billion between April and August 2024 alone. That shows you the scale.
And it's not just electronics, is it? The pharma industry, too. Active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs.
Right. India is a pharmacy to the world, but it imports a huge chunk, around 68% on average each year, of its basic drug ingredients, the bulk drugs and intermediates, from China. That leaves the healthcare sector potentially vulnerable to supply shocks.
Even India's big push on renewable energy, solar panels, batteries, there's a dependence there, too.
Very much so. India's green transition relies heavily on China's dominance in manufacturing solar panels and batteries. In 2023-24, India imported $7 billion worth of solar gear, and over 62% of that came from China. That affects energy independence goals.
And even in traditional industries, heavy machinery, capital goods.
Yes, still a significant source. India's infrastructure projects, its manufacturing sector, they still source a lot of key machinery from China. China makes up nearly 40% of India's machinery imports, even with Make in India.
Okay, so given all these complexities, dependencies, and frictions, the Hindustan Times analysis does suggest some potential ways forward. Measures India could think about to manage this relationship, maybe deepen engagement strategically. Interesting ideas for policy watchers.
They are interesting. The first one is about setting up a permanent mechanism for border stability and confidence building, something more robust than what exists now.
More than the current WMCC.
Exactly. They propose a dedicated body, maybe with a permanent secretariat, expert working groups. The idea is to be more proactive, continuously managing border issues, setting clear protocols for troop movements, things like that, to really minimize the risk of accidental clashes.
Another idea was about co-developing supply chains, but in neutral places, not just trying to break away completely.
Yeah, that's a more nuanced take than just decoupling. The suggestion is maybe exploring joint ventures, logistics hubs, processing facilities, but in places like Africa or Southeast Asia. Could create shared economic stakes in less sensitive areas, maybe foster a more rules-based approach globally.
And what about this strategic autonomy dialogue track involving academics, former officials?
That's the track 1.5 idea. Trying to get a deeper understanding of each other's long-term thinking, especially about Asia and the Indo-Pacific, without getting locked into rigid alliances. Bringing in non-official voices allows for, perhaps, more candid discussions. Could help reduce misunderstandings about intentions.
And given the climate alignment we touched on, that proposal for a bilateral green transition pact seems logical.
It does, focusing on clean energy investments, battery storage, climate-resilient infrastructure. It could anchor cooperation in tackling a global challenge where both have interests. Might even open doors for tech-sharing, joint projects.
And with all the maritime competition, a coordinated Indo-Pacific maritime dialogue.
Right. The focus there would be less on military stuff and more on practical things.
Right.
Freedom of navigation, fighting transnational crime like piracy or smuggling, disaster relief coordination, protecting the marine environment, building confidence in shared waters.
Technology is another area. They suggested an India-China Council for Emerging Tech and AI ethics.
Yes, to try and get ahead of the curve on things like AI, biotech, facilitate policy discussions, maybe develop shared ethical guidelines, cybersecurity norms, could help avoid misunderstandings, and maybe even shape global rules together.
And finally, joint investments in the blue economy and coordinating more in development banks.
Yeah, things like sustainable fishing projects, coastal conservation in the Indian Ocean region, practical cooperation without treading on sovereignty issues, and working together more in institutions like the New Development Bank or the AIIB, maybe co-financing projects in developing countries, focusing on shared global responsibilities.
Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive. Drawing from that Hindustan Times analysis, it's clear India-China relations are, well, complicated and at a critical point. You've got these persistent challenges, the border, strategic mistrust, but also these clear areas of practical cooperation and a mutual need, it seems, to manage tensions.
And the economic ties, especially those supply chain dependencies, they're just undeniable. The analysis lays out some thoughtful potential paths forward, things like diplomatic patience, holding on to strategic autonomy, but also looking for cooperative multilateral opportunities.
Definitely. And for all of you listening who are preparing for your UPSC exams, really getting these nuances is vital. This interplay diplomacy, border issues, economics, strategy, it hits so many key syllabus areas for both mains and prelims. Keep an eye on those specific agreements, the sticking points, and those potential future strategies we discussed.
Absolutely crucial context.
We really hope this deep dive gave you a clearer picture of this incredibly important relationship. If you found it helpful, especially for your prep, please do hit like, subscribe to our channel, and definitely leave a comment if you have questions or other topics you'd like us to tackle. We appreciate the engagement. And just to be clear, everything we discussed today is based on that recent analysis published in the Hindustan Times. Finally, something to chew on. Given this deep economic interdependence, tangled up with intense strategic competition, how might this dynamic between India and China ultimately reshape the bigger picture, the economic and political landscape, not just in Asia, but maybe globally? Something to think about. Until our next deep dive.